Ethan Parker sat in the cold hospital corridor, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. The overhead lights flickered now and then, casting shadows on the white walls. His expensive suit looked out of place in this sterile, urgent space. He stared at the doors at the end of the hallway, waiting for news, any news at all. The only thing he could think was that he might lose the one person he had ever truly cared about. He had no idea how life had led him here. For the last 10 years, he had lived a life without emotional attachments, without the risk of loving someone enough to get hurt. He was a man who had promised himself he would never love again. Yet, at this moment, fear like he had never felt before clawed at his chest. The hospital smells of disinfectant and sorrow choked him. His fists were clenched, and he pressed them tight against his knees, praying to a God he had long stopped believing in. 2 nurses rushed past him with a cart, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was whether she would open her eyes and smile at him again. Was it too late? Had his own stubbornness destroyed his only shot at happiness? Suddenly, a doctor appeared through the swinging doors. For a moment, Ethan's heart almost stopped when he saw the grave look on the man's face. Ethan stood up on shaky legs, not sure he was strong enough to hear the words that might come next. Months earlier, Ethan Parker was known as the millionaire who lived in a grand estate on the outskirts of a city. He was only 35, but had achieved more than most men might hope to achieve in a lifetime. He had started from almost nothing, building a tech company that quickly skyrocketed in value. Business magazines celebrated him as a visionary, a brilliant CEO, and a generous philanthropist. But behind those headlines lay a man who lived by a single lonely creed: never love, never trust, never get hurt. His estate was a stunning place, with tall iron gates at the entrance, well-kept gardens, and a stone pathway that led to a majestic front door. Inside were marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and everything money could buy. Yet every room felt empty. He had a close friend or two, a small circle of trusted employees, and a loyal assistant named Mason. But he kept personal ties to the bare minimum. In truth, Ethan had once been engaged. 10 years ago, he had placed a ring on the finger of the girl he thought he would spend the rest of his life with. But that promise of forever had broken when she decided she loved someone else. The betrayal had been sudden and cruel. From that day on, Ethan swore he would never again be a fool for love. He poured his energy into building his business empire. If he felt lonely at times, he reminded himself that loneliness was safer than heartbreak. He dated on occasion, but none of those brief relationships touched his heart. Whenever he saw even the slightest hint of emotional closeness, he pulled away. It became a pattern, almost a game. If they started to care, he would leave. And so, with time, he built a fortress around his heart, a fortress he thought could never be penetrated. It was an early spring evening when the wind carried just a hint of warmth. Ethan left his office later than usual, deciding to walk instead of riding in his usual black limousine. He had just closed a massive deal with a new overseas partner, and he felt a flicker of satisfaction at the success. But the satisfaction faded quickly into the usual emptiness. He strolled down a busy city street, the sidewalk humming with life. People were hurrying home from work, meeting friends for coffee, or heading to the subway. Ethan, alone as ever, gazed at them. Their laughter and chatter made him feel like an outsider. Then he heard a voice, soft yet firm, calling out from behind him. "Excuse me, sir. You dropped your wallet." He turned around to see a young woman with wavy brown hair and warm eyes. She wore a simple skirt and a light sweater, something casual and unpretentious. She held out his black leather wallet, which must have slipped from his pocket. Ethan took his wallet, astonished he had been so careless. "Thank you," he said stiffly, not used to speaking to strangers outside of a business context. She smiled. "No problem. Just be careful. This city has its fair share of pickpockets, and it's not often someone returns a lost wallet with everything still inside." For a moment, Ethan just looked at her. There was something in her eyes, kindness or perhaps honesty, that made him pause. He didn't smile back, but he gave her a quick nod. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "I'm Ethan." "I'm Isabel," she answered, her voice tinged with warmth. She had no idea who he was, and he found that refreshing. Usually, when people recognized him, they either tried to impress him or ask him for something. But she didn't seem to notice that the man before her was one of the wealthiest in the city. They exchanged a few polite words. Ethan thanked her again, then went on his way. Yet for the next few days, he couldn't get her out of his mind. A week later, Ethan found himself walking down the same street hoping, though he wouldn't admit it, that he might see Isabel again. The evening sun was golden, and the street had the same lively hum. But this time, Ethan wasn't in a rush. He slowed his pace, glancing at storefronts he had never bothered to look at before. Then he saw her through the window of a small bookstore. She was arranging books on a table near the door. Something tugged at his heart. He felt both nervous and excited, emotions that he had long pushed away. He stepped inside. A small bell rang as he opened the door. Isabel looked up, recognized him, and smiled. "You came back," she said, setting down a book. "I did," Ethan admitted. He wasn't sure why he felt awkward, but he pushed through the feeling. "I wanted to thank you again for returning my wallet." She shrugged in a friendly way. "Don't mention it. But is that the only reason?" Ethan hesitated. He was a direct man by nature, but this situation was new to him. "Actually, I was in the neighborhood," he lied, though his voice held a hint of truth. "And I saw you through the window." Isabel laughed softly. "I see. Well, welcome to the bookstore. I work here part-time while finishing my studies. Can I help you find a book?" Ethan looked around. The store was small, with wooden shelves filled to the brim. There were comfortable chairs in one corner, and the scent of coffee from a small cafe counter in the back. "I'm not much of a reader," he admitted. "I mostly read business reports." Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "You sound busy. What kind of work do you do?" He hesitated, deciding not to reveal too much. "I run a tech company," he said simply. She nodded. "I see. Well, maybe you could use a break from numbers. A novel might be a nice escape." Ethan looked at the shelves, feeling a bit lost. Isabel walked him through a few titles, describing each book in a way that made him see stories as something interesting, even magical. Her excitement for books was contagious. He ended up buying one. As he left, he felt a strange warmth spreading inside his chest. It was a small, subtle glow, but it was enough to make him wonder if his old promises to himself could stay intact. One visit turned into two, then three, then more. Ethan found excuses to go to that bookstore, sometimes pretending to be interested in new novels, other times claiming he just needed a quiet spot to work on his laptop. Isabel never seemed suspicious. She was always happy to see him, offering a shy smile or recommending a new author. They started talking about everything: her studies in literature, her dream to open a community center where children could learn to read. She told him how she came from a small town where books had been her only escape from a difficult childhood. Ethan listened, fascinated by a life so different from his own. He found himself sharing more than he intended, small details about his past, even his heartbreak, though he was careful not to reveal how deep the wound went. Isabel was gentle in how she listened, never pushing too hard. Her warmth made Ethan feel safe in a way he hadn't felt in years. After a few weeks, he found out she was also a painter and sometimes sold her small artworks in the bookstore. She even showed him a sketchbook filled with delicate charcoal drawings. Her talent and passion impressed him. One day, after an hour of quiet conversation by the bookstore cafe, Ethan asked if she would like to have dinner with him. He phrased it politely, almost businesslike, but his eyes gave away his real interest. Isabel paused, studying him carefully. Then she said yes. Ethan felt his heart race, a surge of joy that he had nearly forgotten he could feel. He had planned a quiet evening at a high-end restaurant. When he picked Isabel up in his sleek black car, she looked beautiful in a simple blue dress. Her hair was loosely pinned back, leaving a few soft strands around her face. She seemed both excited and nervous. When they arrived at the restaurant, Isabel stared at the tall columns, chandeliers, and well-dressed servers. "This place is gorgeous," she said, looking around. Ethan nodded. He was used to such places, but for some reason, he wanted her to feel comfortable. If it's too much, we can go somewhere else, he offered. She shook her head. It's perfect. Just different from the places I'm used to. She flashed him a smile that made his chest tighten. They sat at a table, by a window overlooking the city lights. They talked about everything. Books, art, travel, and the little details that shaped their days. Isabel was curious about his business, so he told her about how he started from a small tech venture in his apartment. He explained, in simple terms, the excitement he felt each time his ideas worked in the real world. She, in turn, told him about her dream of creating a literacy program for kids who couldn't afford books. She wanted to bring the joy of reading to children who felt alone or trapped by their circumstances. As they spoke, Ethan realized he was smiling more than he had in a long time. And Isabel looked at him with a kind of open admiration that made him feel seen, not for his money, but for who he was beneath all that wealth. Over the next few months, Ethan and Isabel grew closer. They began sharing quiet evenings at the bookstore, taking walks in the park, and even going to small art galleries. Isabel opened his eyes to a slower, more artistic side of life. Meanwhile, Ethan showed her some of his world. Fancy dinners, high-rise offices, and even philanthropic events where she saw how his donations helped charities in the city. Yet beneath their blooming closeness, Ethan wrestled with an old fear. Late at night, he would remember the day his former fiancée had shattered his heart. He would recall how the promise of forever had turned to dust in his hands. Sometimes he felt panic rising at the thought that he might be falling in love again. One evening, after a peaceful dinner at his estate, Isabel noticed his distant gaze as they sat on the couch. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, placing her hand on his arm. Ethan hesitated. He had never told her the full story of his heartbreak. Now, seeing the concern in her eyes, he found himself wanting to be honest. So he told her about his lost love. He explained how he had once believed in romance and marriage, only to watch it all crumble. As he spoke, his voice shook slightly. "I swore after that I would never love again," he admitted, his eyes downcast. Isabel listened with empathy, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. When he finished, she leaned in and pressed her forehead gently to his. "I understand why you feel that way," she whispered. "But I hope you won't close your heart to the possibility of something real. Not everyone will hurt you." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, not sure if he dared to jump. Finally, he pulled her into a gentle embrace. And in that quiet space, he felt a crack forming in the walls he had built around himself. Their new bond seemed promising, but life had a way of testing even the strongest connections. Around this time, Ethan's company was preparing to launch a major product that would transform online security. The pressure from investors and competitors was immense. Everyone wanted a piece of the groundbreaking technology. Ethan's schedule became even more demanding. He had daily meetings, calls at odd hours, and endless requests from business partners. He tried his best to balance work and his relationship with Isabel, but tension crept in. Isabel was patient. She understood that Ethan's work was important and that he had a lot of responsibilities. But she also saw how tired and stressed he was. Sometimes he would snap at her without meaning to, or he would cancel a date last minute because of a business emergency. Meanwhile, Isabel was working on her final exams and a plan for her own future. She had applied for funding to start her community literacy program. She tried not to burden Ethan with it, even though she hoped he might offer some guidance. One night, as he dropped her off at her small apartment, she asked him if he had any advice on writing grant proposals. Ethan, who was buried in phone notifications about a glitch in his product, gave a frustrated sigh. He spoke harshly. "Isabel, can we talk about this later? I'm dealing with a crisis at work." He didn't mean to hurt her. He was just overwhelmed. But the look in her eyes told him that his words had stung. She gave a quiet nod and said goodnight, disappearing into her building. Ethan sat in the car for a while, staring at the steering wheel, feeling guilty and unsure of what to do next. 2 days later, Isabel was stacking books in the bookstore when she heard a familiar voice behind her. It was Mason, Ethan's personal assistant. He had always been polite to her, but she was surprised to see him there alone. "Hi, Isabel," he said. "I came because I want to show you something." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter from a private foundation. She read the first lines and gasped. It stated that her community literacy program had been approved for a large grant, one that would allow her to open her center much sooner than expected. Her eyes widened. "Is this real?" she asked breathlessly. Mason nodded. "Yes. The foundation is linked to Ethan's company. He wanted to keep it quiet, but, well, I think you deserve to know. He saw your proposal and believed in it. He made sure it was funded. He didn't want you to feel pressured, so he did it anonymously." A swirl of emotions rushed through Isabel. She was touched by Ethan's kindness, but also a bit conflicted. She wondered why he hadn't told her himself. Maybe he had wanted to protect her sense of independence. Maybe he was just too busy. But one thing was clear. He believed in her dream. That thought alone filled her with gratitude and renewed love for him. She asked Mason not to tell Ethan she knew. "I want to thank him in my own way," she said, smiling through her tears. As the product launch for Ethan's company drew near, the demands on his time became even heavier. The night before the launch, he felt so exhausted he could barely think. He sat in his large home office, checking lines of code on his laptop, making sure there were no last-minute errors. Then he heard a gentle knock on the door. He looked up to see Isabel standing there with a takeout bag in her hands. She smiled softly. "I thought you could use some dinner." He blinked in surprise. "How did you get past security?" She smirked a little. "Mason let me in. He told me you've been working nonstop." Ethan stood, gratitude flooding him. He walked over and pulled her into a hug. "Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed this." They sat together, eating quietly at the small table in the office. After a while, Isabel cleared her throat. "I found out about the grant. The one for my literacy program." Her eyes locked on his. "I know it was you, Ethan. Thank you." He stiffened slightly, unsure if she was upset. "I just wanted to help," he murmured. "I saw how hard you've been working, and I believed in your dream. I didn't want you to feel obligated to me in any way, so I kept it anonymous." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm not upset. I'm grateful. You have been so busy, and yet you still found time to think of me. That means more than words can say." For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Ethan let out a long breath. "You make me want to believe in love again," he confessed. "You make me want to break every promise I made to myself about staying alone." Isabel's eyes shimmered with tears. She stood up, moved around the table, and leaned down to kiss him softly. His hand slid around her waist, and he held her close. In that gentle contact, he felt the walls around his heart crumble a little more. The next day was the big product launch. Everything went smoothly at first. The new software was unveiled, the press took photos, and investors shook Ethan's hand, congratulating him on another success. But that night, news broke of a serious security bug that had slipped past the testing phase. This bug put user data at risk, and the press quickly turned the launch into a scandal. Competitors mocked Ethan's company, and stock prices began to drop. Ethan faced the crisis head-on, but the pressure was immense. He hardly slept, rushing between meetings to fix the bug and salvage the company's reputation. Rumors spread that he had been too distracted, that he was losing his touch. People blamed him, saying he had let personal matters interfere with his work. Suddenly, the soft, budding love he had found with Isabel felt threatened. He was terrified that she would see him fail, that she would lose respect for him. One morning, after 3 days of chaos, Ethan woke up to find dozens of missed calls on his phone. He had dozed off in his home office again. When he finally read through his messages, he saw one from Isabel. "Let me know if you need anything. I'm here." He felt a twist of shame in his stomach. He wanted to see her, to feel her warmth. But he also feared that letting her see him in such a vulnerable state might break him. Still, she was the only person who could bring him calm in that storm. The bug was fixed after a week of frantic work. The company's damage control helped recover most of the lost trust. But Ethan was left shaken. His old fears came rushing back. He remembered the betrayal from his fiancée and felt certain that love was a risk that could ruin him when he needed to be at his strongest. One evening, Isabel visited him at his estate. She found him in the garden, sitting on a stone bench. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the roses. But Ethan's face was shadowed with worry. She sat next to him, touching his hand lightly. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said gently. He looked at her, torn between gratitude and fear. Then he stood up, pacing. "I can't afford to be weak right now," he muttered. "I can't let my emotions get in the way of my responsibilities. I made a promise to never let my heart control me again. I almost forgot that promise." Isabel stood as well, confusion etched on her face. "Ethan, love isn't weakness. It can give you strength, help you face challenges. You don't have to do everything alone." He shook his head, tension clear in his voice. "You say that now, but I've seen how love can destroy everything. It happened to me before. I can't let it happen again." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm not her," she whispered. "I won't leave you like she did." Ethan knew that, but fear was a powerful thing. He felt it closing in on him, making him say words he didn't mean. "I need some time, Isabel. I can't do this right now." She looked at him, heartbroken. "You're pushing me away," she choked out. He said nothing, only lowered his eyes. Isabel fought back tears and spoke quietly. "I understand you're scared, but don't punish me for someone else's mistakes." She paused, waiting for him to respond. When he said nothing, she sighed. "I love you, Ethan, but I also love myself enough to step away if you refuse to let me in." With that, she turned and walked back inside. He stood there in the garden, watching her figure disappear. A few moments later, he heard the sound of her car leaving. The days that followed were a blur for Ethan. He threw himself even harder into work, attending board meetings, forging new partnerships, and trying to quell the last of the scandal. But all the while, he felt a hollow ache inside him. He found no joy in his success. Each time he came home to his grand estate, he felt the emptiness more intensely. The memory of Isabel's tears wouldn't leave his mind. He recalled the softness of her voice, how she had told him she loved him. He also remembered the strength in her last words. She wouldn't let herself be destroyed by his fear. Late one night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He wandered through the large, silent rooms of his house until he reached the library. On one shelf, he saw the first novel Isabel had recommended to him. He picked it up, ran his fingers over the cover, and felt a wave of regret wash over him. He remembered her dream of the literacy center, how she had glowed with excitement whenever she talked about it. Then he thought about how he had pushed her away, just like he had always done whenever he got too close to someone. He had told himself he was protecting his heart. But now he saw that by doing so, he was only hurting himself and the person who cared about him most. He knew he had to make a choice. Either he could run forever, letting fear rule his life, or he could face the risk of heartbreak to embrace the possibility of real happiness. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a plan. First, he called Mason and cleared his schedule for the entire week, ignoring any protests about urgent matters. He left instructions for his team to handle everything while he was away. Then he called a private pilot and arranged to fly to a small town 3 hours from the city, the town where Isabel had grown up. He remembered her stories about the local park and the modest library that had first inspired her love of books. When he arrived, he checked into a simple bed and breakfast. The owner recognized his name from business news, but was discreet enough not to pry. Ethan spent the afternoon walking through the town, imagining Isabel as a young girl, wandering these streets with a dream in her heart. He visited the old library, where she had once discovered her first favorite novel. The dusty shelves held a kind of charm that made him smile. Standing among those books, Ethan felt closer to her than he had in days. He realized that in pushing her away, he had been running from his own past. Now, he wanted nothing more than to let love in. He just had to hope it wasn't too late. 2 days later, Ethan returned to the city. He found out through Mason that Isabel was spending most of her free time at the new literacy center, setting it up and training volunteers. She had moved forward with her life. He respected her determination, but he also felt a pang of worry that she might have closed her heart to him after his rejection. That evening, he showed up at the Literacy Center unannounced. It was a modest building with brightly painted walls and shelves filled with donated books. He walked in quietly and saw Isabel standing at a table, sorting books into categories with the help of 2 volunteers. When she turned and saw him, she froze. "Ethan," she said, looking surprised. Her volunteer friends took one glance at the tension between them and slipped out of the room, leaving them alone. He swallowed, nerves making his voice unsteady. "I came to see if I could help." She crossed her arms, eyes guarded. "I thought you were too busy, or that you needed time." Ethan nodded, stepping closer. "I was wrong," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I got scared. I let my past control me instead of trusting what's in front of me." Isabel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was hurt, Ethan. You shut me out." He gently took her hands in his, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I know. I hate that I caused you pain. But I'm here now, ready to give all of myself to you, if you'll have me." She looked at their joined hands. "How do I know you won't run again?" He took a shaky breath. "Because I realize that losing you is a bigger risk than anything else. I'd rather face the fear of heartbreak than spend one more day in a life without you." Her tears slipped free then, and a faint smile curved her lips. She didn't speak for a moment, letting his words sink in. Then she squeezed his hands. "I believe you," she whispered. Ethan's heart soared. He pulled her into his arms, and she pressed her face against his chest. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, letting the silence speak the words that they couldn't say. When Isabel reached him, Ethan gently supported her arm. They exchanged vows that were heartfelt and honest. "I was lost," Ethan said, voice thick with emotion, "afraid to open my heart. But you showed me that love is worth every risk. I promise to stand by you through every storm and every triumph for the rest of our lives." Isabel's hands trembled as she slid the ring onto his finger. "You healed wounds I didn't even know I had. I promise to love you with all I have, to walk by your side, and to face every challenge with hope and faith in our love." The moment they were pronounced husband and wife, applause filled the small space. Ethan lifted Isabel's hands, kissed them, and then gently kissed her on the lips. In that kiss, they sealed the promise of a life shared, a life built on trust, respect, and a love strong enough to conquer fear. The children from the Literacy Center giggled in excitement, tossing homemade confetti in the air. Book pages rustled softly in the background as a light breeze drifted through an open window. There, among the books that had brought them together, the man who once swore against love found his heart's true home in the woman who made him break every promise he had made to himself. And in that shared promise, they found not just a happy ending, but a beautiful beginning. Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here and supporting what I do. Your comments and feedback mean the world to me. If you enjoyed this, please take a moment to leave a comment and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future updates. I love hearing from you, and your support helps keep this community growing. Thanks again, and let's keep the conversation going.